A lump in abdomen. This case presentation is the 7th in the series of cassette clinics of general surgery prepared by Dr. Ghanashyam Vaidya from Karnataka Health Institute Ghataprabha, an ex-student of Seth GS Medical College and the KEM Hospital, Mumbai. A 65 years old Hindu male patient Dagdu, staying at Mahim, car driver by occupation, comes with complaints of pain in abdomen since 2 months and lump in abdomen and vomiting after food since last 6 weeks. The patient was apparently alright 2 months back when he first experienced belching and fullness of stomach after food. After 1 week, it was replaced by pain and vomiting after food. The pain is felt in the epigastrium. It is dull aching in character, present throughout the day but not disturbing the sleep. It is aggravated and becomes sharp shooting when food is taken. It radiates to the angle of left scapula since last 2 weeks. What does the radiation to the back suggest? That it is originating either from pancreas or from a lesion in the stomach and duodenum which is infiltrating the retroperitoneal tissues. The pain was experienced with all types of food including milk and water and is followed by vomiting. But vomiting does not relieve the pain and the patient eats less for the fear of pain. What type of pain is this? Sir, this is the pain of a gastric ulcer aggravated by food. But since it is radiating to the back and not relieved by vomiting, an acute exacerbation and posterior penetration of gastric ulcer and also gastric carcinoma should be kept in mind. Proceed. The vomiting is preceded by nausea. It is non-projectile, non-bilious, containing undigested food, no history of hematemesis. How does a vomit of hematemesis look? Fresh bright red color if from the esophagus and dark brown if from the stomach or duodenum. Why so? Because of the action of hydrochloric acid in the stomach on hemoglobin, producing acid hematin, which is brown in color. Simultaneously, the patient noticed a lump above the umbilicus, which is constant in size over the last month. Well, the history has been very suggestive. What do you think of the lump at this stage? Sir, from the history of the symptoms, the lump appears to be originating in the stomach, probably a carcinoma of stomach or posterior penetration of peptic ulcer. But I cannot be sure about it unless I have ruled out other causes, for even an epigastric hernia can mimic gastric symptoms. Right. And from exam point of view, the main part of history presentation starts now. The patient's story of positive points is over and your story of negative points begins. At this point, bring before your mind all the organs in that area and the types of lumps that can arise from them, and then rule them out. Now I will talk aloud the thinking part, that is the organs and the names of the lumps arising from them, and you present the related positive or negative points in history. So let us start. First, the stomach. See a stomach. There is history of anorexia, recent weight loss, but no history of melena or hematemesis. Paragastric abscess, that is subacute perforation of peptic ulcer. No history of pain related to food in the past, no history of fever. Trichobezoar. No history of psychological disturbances or history of habit of eating hair. Liver, hepatoma. No history of chronic alcoholism, no history of recent weight loss with jaundice, distension of abdomen, edema feet, impotency or breast swelling. Amoebic liver abscess. No history of blood and mucus in the stools in the past, no history of high fever with chills, with pain in the right hypochondrium or right lower chest. Hydatid cyst. No history of close contact with dogs, especially in childhood. No history of urticaria. Gallbladder. Calculus cholecystitis with mucocele or empyema. No history of flatulent dyspepsia, biliary colic, high fever with chills and rigors. Malignant CBD obstruction. No history of jaundice with itching and white stools. Pancreas, pseudopancreatic cyst or abscess. No history of recent attack of severe epigastric pain radiating to the back with vomiting and retching. No history of diarrhea with frothy offensive stools. No history of progressive jaundice with weight loss and melena. Intestines and transverse colon, CA colon. No history of altered bowel habits or alternate diarrhea and constipation. No history of fresh blood in the stools. Obstructive pathologies. No history of borborygmi, colicky pains, vomiting and constipation. Lymph nodes, filariasis. No history of fever with chills or pain in the inguinal region. Tuberculosis. No history suggestive of pulmonary tuberculosis or contact with a known case of tuberculosis. Lymphoma. No history of swelling in the neck, axilla or groin. Metastasis. No history of scrotal swelling. Right. Now we have completed the possible epigastric lumps. Now for the sake of completion, let us discuss here about the other organs also which are not in the epigastrium. Kidneys, hydro and pyonephrosis due to calculus or tuberculosis and malignant tumor. Sir, no history of pain in the loin or ureteric colic, no history of edema of feet or puffiness of face in the morning, no history of frequency of micturition, pyuria, dysuria and hematuria, no history of sudden passage of large amount of urine with decrease in the size of the swelling. What is this phenomenon known as? Diethel's crisis in hydronephrosis. This history should be asked in a lump that appears and disappears. Right. And which lumps in abdomen appear and disappear? Intussusception and Diethel's crisis in hydronephrosis. Other lumps that change their size and position are roundworm masses and hard stools. Yes. Now the spleen, malaria, Kala-Azar or typhoid. No history of intermittent fever with rigors or continuous fever. Leukemia and lymphoma. No history of recent weight loss with bleeding gums, bone pains or repeated infections. No history of swellings in the neck, axilla or groin. Hemolytic anemia and hypersplenism. No history of jaundice and biliary colic. No history of blood disorders in the family or bleeding tendencies. Portal hypertension. No history of hematemesis. If there is history of hematemesis, I will ask for history of peptic ulcer like pain, history of drug ingestion prior to hematemesis, especially aspirin, then the amount, color, hospitalization and number of blood transfusions, history of jaundice or disturbed consciousness after the episode, and history of abdominal distension and liver cell failure. If there is splenomegaly or ascites, I will ask for history of etiology of the portal hypertension. For example, in a child, for etiology of portal hypertension, I will ask for history of umbilical sepsis or home delivery, history of severe diarrhea or any major illness in early childhood, history of jaundice or blood transfusions. In an adult patient, I will ask for history of chronic alcoholism, history of jaundice, history of blood transfusions, and history of abdominal distension or lump. Good. And lastly, small intestinal lump. No history of passage of roundworms in the stools or vomit. No history of colicky pains, vomiting or distension. Right. Now go ahead. No family history of peptic ulcer, carcinoma stomach or blood disorders. Personal history, patient is non-alcoholic, smokes 10 cigarettes per day for last 30 years. Bowel habits, micturition, sleep are normal. No history of any specific treatment taken except antacids. On general examination, start with the examination of the abdomen. On inspection, the contour of the abdomen is scaphoid, no generalized distension. What are the causes of generalized distension of abdomen? Sir, classically described as 5 F's: fat, fluid, flatus, feces and fetus, to which may also be added fetal growth or tumor. Yes, if in standing position, only the lower abdomen looks protuberant, what will you think of? Sir, if seen only on standing, it is likely to be due to poor abdominal muscle tone or rarely visceroptosis. If it persists in lying down position, full bladder and lower abdominal tumors should be thought of. Alright, proceed. The abdomen is scaphoid, no generalized distension. There is a diffuse bulge in the epigastrium which diminishes on rising test. How do you do the rising test? Ask the patient to lie supine with arms folded over the chest and then ask him to raise the neck without support. This makes the abdominal wall muscles, mainly the recti abdominis, contract so that a parietal swelling superficial to the muscle will become more prominent, while intra-abdominal swellings will become less prominent. Why do the recti contract when the neck is raised? To stabilize the thoracic cage, which acts as the fixed point over which the neck flexes. Is there any other way to make the abdominal muscles taut? Firstly, the leg lifting test, where the patient is asked to lift the extended legs off the bed by flexion at the hips. Here, mainly the obliques will contract to stabilize the pelvis. And secondly, Valsalva's maneuver, that is, attempting to blow out against closed vocal cords with nose and mouth shut. So the abdominal muscles contract to raise the intra-abdominal pressure. These tests, that is, leg raising and Valsalva's maneuver, are more suited for laterally placed swellings, while swellings close to the midline under the recti are better tested with the neck raising test. Is there any other test to differentiate intra from extra-abdominal swelling on inspection? Note the movement of the swelling with respiration. A swelling that moves up and down with respiration is definitely intra-abdominal. And if it doesn't, then it is of no significance, as all intra-abdominal swellings do not move with respiration. Why? Because only those intra-abdominal swellings that arise from organs like liver, gallbladder, stomach, spleen and kidneys, which are in direct or indirect contact with the dome of the diaphragm and are free to move, will move with respiration. And even these swellings will not move if they are fixed to the surrounding structures by infection or malignant infiltration. Go ahead. The skin shows no dilated veins, scars or sinuses. In which conditions do you see dilated veins over the abdomen? Firstly, caput medusae or periumbilical dilated veins with centrifugal flow in portal hypertension. Secondly, vertically running lateral veins with upward flow in the inferior vena cava obstruction. Thirdly, over the lower abdomen in association with varicose veins. And lastly, locally distended veins over malignant abdominal wall tumors. Yes, how do you determine the direction of blood flow in the vein? By Harvey's test, keep two index fingers close together over a vein and slide one finger away so as to empty a segment of the vein. Now release one of the fingers and note the rate of refilling of the vein. Then repeat the procedure, this time releasing the other finger. The direction in which the vein fills more rapidly is the direction of the blood flow. Proceed. Umbilicus is normal in position and shape. Which abnormalities of umbilicus did you look for? Displacement of the umbilicus towards or away from the swelling, transverse stretching or eversion seen in ascites, and deep or tucked in umbilicus in obesity. Alright, continue. The abdomen moves well with respiration, no visible peristalsis or pulsations in the epigastrium or over the lump. How do you differentiate between peristaltic movements and pulsations? Sir, they are totally different movements, sir. Yes, but what is the differentiating point of pulsations? Sir, pulsation is a movement which is repetitive and is synchronous with the pulse beat. Right. Now tell me, when can you see pulsations in the epigastric region? Sir, in a very thin person, normal pulsations of the aorta or the heart may be transmitted to the epigastrium. The pathological conditions are aneurysm of abdominal aorta, a tumor situated in front of aorta and transmitting its pulsations to the abdominal wall, and lastly, pulsatile enlarged liver in tricuspid regurgitation. And when are peristalsis visible? In pyloric stenosis and early stage of dynamic intestinal obstruction. In pyloric stenosis, the peristaltic waves pass from left costal margin to the right, while in obstructed transverse colon, they pass from right to left. They are seen best by looking at the abdomen tangentially. In small intestinal obstruction, a step-ladder pattern of peristalsis may be seen. Right. And in suspected cases of obstruction, if you are looking for peristalsis, flick the abdomen lightly or pour a few drops of ether to stimulate the peristalsis. Go ahead. Hernial sites are normal, no scrotal swelling, spine shows no deformity, no paraspinal swelling, no fullness in the renal angle or loin. On palpation, no, you have missed something important in inspection. Sir, no fullness or swelling in the left supraclavicular region. Right. If at the end of examination of an abdominal lump, the examiner brings to your notice that you have forgotten something, think of 4 things that you have probably missed. Left supraclavicular or Furchow's lymph nodes, spine, hernial sites, and examination of testis and genitalia. Now, can you tell me what relation supraclavicular nodes have got with an abdominal lump? Sir, left supraclavicular lymph nodes can be enlarged due to metastasis from any visceral carcinoma, especially the carcinoma of stomach, liver, and pancreas, and testicular tumors. Why do metastasis involve only the left supraclavicular nodes? Because the spread occurs via the lymphatics, which ultimately drain into the thoracic duct, which ends in the left side of the neck into the left internal jugular vein. Any other way in which supraclavicular nodes may be enlarged with an abdominal lump? Yes, sir. In case of generalized lymphadenopathy or lymphomas, where an enlarged spleen or retroperitoneal lymph node mass can give rise to an associated intra-abdominal lump. Alright, go ahead with palpation. What is the position of the patient during palpation? Tell me the ideal method. Sir, the patient should lie supine on a firm bed with a pillow under the head and a pillow under the knee, thus flexing the neck and the hip slightly. If possible, a backrest of 20 degrees should be kept to relax the recti further. If your hands are cold, warm them up by rubbing against each other. Ask the patient to breathe quietly with open mouth. Begin the palpation away from the site of pain or lump. Palpate with the fingers straight and flat over the abdomen, flexing at the metacarpophalangeal joint. And palpate gently during the expiratory phase of respiration. Good. What did you find on palpation? There is no local rise of temperature. There is mild tenderness 2 centimeters below the zipisternum. No rebound tenderness, guarding or rigidity. What is rebound tenderness? Palpate gently over the tender area, gradually increasing the pressure during each expiration. Press the fingers as deep into the abdomen as possible and then take the hand away suddenly. A sharp pain on withdrawal of the hand is termed as rebound tenderness and it indicates the presence of peritonitis. Rebound tenderness in a case of intestinal obstruction strongly suggests strangulation and gangrene of the gut. How do you determine the point of maximum tenderness? By pressing the index finger vertically and gently at various points. How does it help? The site of point of maximum tenderness indicates the likely cause of the pathology. For example, in gastric ulcer, it is midway between zipisternum and umbilicus. In duodenal ulcer, it is 1.5 inches to the right of the midline below the costal margin. In gallbladder disease, it is just below the tip of 9th costal cartilage. In appendicitis, It is at the McBurney's point at the junction of middle and lateral 1/3 of the spino-umbilical line, joining umbilicus and right anterior superior iliac spine. In renal disease, it is in the renal angle, that is, between the lower border of the 12th rib and the lateral border of sacrospinalis. Yes, how do you grade the severity of the tenderness? Mild tenderness is tenderness on deep pressure. Moderate tenderness is the presence of protective spasm or guarding. And severe tenderness is the presence of rigidity or rebound tenderness. What is the difference between guarding and rigidity? Sir, both are reflex contractions of the abdominal wall muscles in response to inflammation of the parietal peritoneum. In the early or mild stages, the reflex contraction occurs only when the peritoneum is disturbed and irritated by the palpating finger. This is known as guarding. Later, when definite inflammation sets in the parietal peritoneum, the muscle contraction becomes persistent even at rest. This is termed as rigidity. And what is voluntary rigidity? If the patient keeps the abdominal wall muscle stiff for the fear of being hurt, it is termed as voluntary rigidity. How do you differentiate it from true guarding and rigidity? Sir, voluntary rigidity is always generalized and bilateral, which also means that localized guarding is always pathological. Secondly, if gentle palpation is carried out, voluntary rigidity reduces and may disappear during expiration, while true rigidity remains constant. How can you eliminate the element of voluntary rigidity? The patient's confidence must be gained by being gentle in behavior. The finger should not be poked deep and suddenly. Palpate with a flat hand gently and press only during expiration. What is the significance of rigidity? It indicates irritation of the underlying parietal peritoneum. So if present over the upper half of right rectus, it will suggest a peptic ulcer perforation or acute cholecystitis. If over the right iliac fossa, acute appendicitis, and so on. Okay, proceed. On deep palpation, a single intra-abdominal lump is palpable in the epigastrium. Very good. Always start the deep palpation by mentioning whether the lump is intra-abdominal or extra-abdominal. Otherwise, you will invariably forget to mention this very important point. A single intra-abdominal lump is palpable in the epigastrium, extending into the umbilical and right hypochondriac regions. How do you demarcate these regions? Sir, abdomen is divided in 9 regions by 4 imaginary lines, 2 vertical and 2 horizontal. The 2 vertical lines are drawn through the midinguinal point below, that is midway between symphysis pubis and anterior superior iliac spine, and above through the midpoint of the clavicle between acromioclavicular joint and the center of the suprasternal notch. The upper horizontal line is the subcostal plane. Subcostal or transpyloric? Sir, subcostal plane. For anatomical description, transpyloric plane through the tip of the 9th costal cartilage has been considered as the upper horizontal line. But clinically, when drawn on the patient, it crosses the vertical line on the rib cage, thus leaving no part of hypochondrium accessible to palpation. So clinically, subcostal plane passing through the lowest point of the costal margin, that is lower border of the 10th costal cartilage, is considered as the upper horizontal line. It corresponds with the upper border of 3rd lumbar vertebra. The lower horizontal line is the transtubercular plane, passing through the tubercles on the outer border of the iliac crest, about 5 cm behind the anterior superior iliac spine. It corresponds to the upper border of L5 vertebra. Is this also the line joining the highest points of iliac crest? No sir, the line joining the highest points of iliac crest is 2.5 to 3 cm above the transtubercular plane, and it corresponds to the L3-4 disc and umbilicus. And what lies at the transpyloric plane? The transpyloric plane corresponds to the tip of the 9th costal cartilage and its junction with linea semilunaris, that is lateral border of the rectus muscle. It also corresponds to the lower border of L1, and midpoint between cipisternum and umbilicus, and midpoint between suprasternal notch and symphysis pubis. In the abdomen, it passes through the pylorus, neck of pancreas, and kidney hilum. Coming back to the 9 abdominal regions, can you name them now? In the upper third, epigastrium in the center with right and left hypochondria. In the middle third, umbilical region in the center with right and left lumbar regions. And in the lower third, hypogastrium in the center flanked by right and left iliac regions. Proceed. The lump is firm, non-tender and non-indentable. Is it ballotable? Sir, the test of ballotability does not apply to this swelling as it is not in the lumbar region, and the spine behind it does not allow a push to be given from behind. Then which swellings are ballotable? To be ballotable, the swelling should lie in the lumbar region and it should have a long pedicle. Answer to the point. Which swellings are ballotable? Renal and suprarenal swellings, unless they are fixed due to inflammation or malignant infiltration, or are so large as to touch the anterior abdominal wall. Why? What happens if it touches the anterior abdominal wall? Then both hands touch the swelling simultaneously and it is not possible to toss the swelling between the hands. How do you test for ballotability? Keep one hand gently overlying the anterior abdominal wall above the swelling, and with the other hand placed in the loin, just lateral to the sacrospinalis, give a sharp forward jerk to the swelling. If the swelling is ballotable, the anterior hand will feel the swelling touching the anterior abdominal wall and fall back. Ballotability means free mobility in antero-posterior direction. Where else can you apply this test of ballotability? For other intra-abdominal mobile swellings, especially in presence of ascites. Then for pelvic lumps like ovarian cysts, with watching hand over the hypogastrium and displacing fingers in the rectum or vagina. And another classical application of ballotment is in the confirmation of pregnancy between 6 and 10 weeks. How does it differ from bimanual palpation? Sir, bimanual palpation is the ability to palpate a swelling between two diametrically opposite placed hands simultaneously. When possible, bimanual palpation helps in judging the exact size, dimensions and consistency of intra-abdominal swellings. Proceed. The lump is firm, non-tender, non-indentable with a smooth surface. The margin is well defined in the lower half but is hidden under the costal margin in the upper half. Fingers can be insinuated between the lump and the costal margin. It is fixed in all directions and does not move on respiration. It exhibits transmitted pulsations of aorta which disappear in knee elbow position. Why do you say they are transmitted? Firstly, by two finger test, that is, when I kept two index fingers on two sides of the swelling, they rose with each pulsation but did not separate from each other. In which swelling would they have separated from each other? In aneurysm of abdominal aorta, because of the expansile pulsations, that is, expansion in all directions. Secondly, in knee elbow position, the pulsations disappear as the swelling falls away from the aorta. Right, proceed. On palpation of the rest of the abdomen, the liver, spleen and kidneys are not palpable, no other lump in abdomen, no colonic tenderness, no right intercostal tenderness. Very nice. After completing the palpation of the lump, palpate specifically for the liver, spleen, both kidneys and any other lump. Then, looking for amoebiasis, especially in liver swellings, look for colonic tenderness and right intercostal tenderness. No expansile impulse over the hernial sites on cuffing. Both the testes are in scrotum, normal in size and consistency. Why? If a testis is not present in scrotum, will it produce epigastric lump? Sir, undescended inguinal or abdominal testis is very prone to malignant change with a very high incidence of 1 in 80, and a seminoma will often present with an epigastric swelling due to enlarged para-aortic lymph nodes, the primary being too small to be noticed. So in every case of epigastric lump, it is very important to see whether both the testes are in scrotum, and if they are, do they show any sign of malignancy. Right. So both testes are in scrotum, normal in size and consistency, testicular sensations are present. In which conditions are testicular sensations lost? Leprosy, testicular tumor, gamma, and testicular atrophy. Atrophy may occur secondary to orchitis, estrogen therapy, or chronic liver cell failure in cirrhosis. No tenderness or deformity of the spine, no paraspinal muscle spasm, no renal angle tenderness, left supraclavicular lymph nodes are not palpable. How did you look for a renal angle tenderness? With the patient sitting up, with arms folded in front, I placed my thumb under the 12th rib and made short jabbing movements with increasing strength. This is also known as Murphy's kidney punch. On percussion, dull note over the lump, not continuous with the liver dullness, which is of normal size. Upper border of the liver is in 6th intercostal space in mid-clavicular line as confirmed by tidal percussion. Splenic dullness is normal. No evidence of free fluid in abdomen. You say there is no free fluid in abdomen? Sir, no clinical evidence of free fluid. That is, free fluid up to 1 liter may be present. Do you mean to say that less than 1 liter of fluid cannot be clinically detected? Not by routinely performed tests. By Poodle sign, as little as 500 ml can be detected. How do you demonstrate Poodle sign? With the patient in knee elbow position, percuss over the dependent umbilical area. Dullness indicates presence of fluid. Or keep a stethoscope near the umbilicus in midline and scratch the abdominal wall from periphery to the center. If fluid is present, the intensity of sound increases when fluid border is reached. And what are the routine tests for detecting fluid in abdomen? Dullness in the flanks with shifting dullness, then horseshoe-shaped dullness, and fluid thrill. How do you do these tests? For shifting dullness, with the patient lying supine, percuss from the umbilicus towards the flanks. When dullness is reached, keep the finger just inside the line of dullness and turn the patient to the opposite side. Now wait for a few seconds to allow the fluid to gravitate to the opposite side and then percuss again. Change of dull note into a resonant note confirms the presence of free fluid, and the test is completed by making the patient horizontal again and demonstrating that the note becomes dull once again. And if the note does not change with the change in position, then the dullness in the flanks is not due to free fluid. It may be due to a solid intraperitoneal swelling or an encysted fluid collection. Is there any other way to confirm that the dullness in the flanks is due to fluid? Yes, sir. By demonstrating fluid thrill. With the patient lying supine, ask an assistant or the patient to press the ulnar edge of his hand firmly in the midline in the umbilical region. Then keep one hand gently over one lumbar region and tap over the other lumbar region with the other hand. A definite impulse felt by the palpating finger is described as fluid thrill. Is this test foolproof? No, sir. A false negative result may be obtained if fluid collection is not tense, and a false positive result may be obtained, one, in the presence of a very large ovarian cyst, and two, by transmission of an impulse through subcutaneous fat of the abdominal wall. This can be prevented by pressing the assistant's hand in the center. So, how do you clinically judge the amount of fluid in the peritoneal cavity? Positive Poodle sign more than 500 ml, shifting dullness in the flanks 1.5 to 2 liters, horseshoe-shaped dullness more than 2 liters. What is the amount of fluid normally present in the peritoneal cavity? About 150 ml. And in the presence of fluid thrill? Sir, thrill does not depend on the amount, but it depends on the tension of the fluid. However, more than 1.2 liters of fluid is required for fluid thrill to be demonstrable. Any other type of thrill in the abdomen that you know of? Sir, hydatid thrill or the after thrill. 3 fingers are kept lightly over the cystic lump in the abdomen and the middle finger is percussed. If the hydatid cyst contains free-lying daughter cysts and brood capsules, they are displaced, and when they move and strike the cyst wall, an after thrill is felt by the lateral 2 fingers. Proceed. On auscultation, normal peristaltic sounds are heard. No bruit. Can you describe normal peristaltic sounds? Sir, they are low-pitched gurgling sounds occurring every 20 to 30 seconds. And what variations can you get in a diseased abdomen? Firstly, absence of peristalsis in paralytic ileus and late phase of dynamic intestinal obstruction. Secondly, hyperperistalsis or borborygmy in subacute intestinal obstruction or early phase of acute obstruction. And lastly, high-pitched tinkling sounds when proximal loops become distended and displacement of fluid and air from one loop to another produces tinkling sounds. Now, what is your diagnosis? Sir, I would like to do perrectal examination for pelvic deposits. Diagnosis. My diagnosis is an intra-abdominal lump in epigastrium. I would like to give a differential diagnosis. First, carcinoma of stomach. Second, malignant lymph nodes or lymphoma. Why do you say that the lump is intra-abdominal? Because on contraction of the abdominal wall muscles, the visible bulge in the epigastrium diminishes in size and the lump becomes difficult to palpate. And if it had become easier to palpate, then I would have thought of parietal swellings and quickly tested its mobility over the contracted muscle. If it is freely mobile, it is superficial to the muscle like a subcutaneous lipoma, fibroma, etc. And if it becomes fixed to the contracted muscle, then it is probably arising from the muscle or muscle sheath like the desmoid tumor. I think it is amoebic liver abscess in the left lobe of liver. Do you agree? No sir, the lump is present for last 2 months with no history of fever with chills, no pain, no history of blood and mucus in the stools, no history of chronic alcoholism. On examination, the lump is firm, it is non-tender. There is no colonic or intercostal tenderness. Also, it is not a liver lump as fingers can be insinuated between the lump and the costal margin, and it does not move with respiration. The right lobe of liver is also not palpable. On percussion, the dullness over the lump is not continuous with the liver dullness. So I do not think this could be a liver lump or a amoebic liver abscess. Why not carcinoma of transverse colon? Sir, there is no history of altered bowel habits, no history of fresh blood in stools, no history of colicky pains, increasing constipation or abdominal distension. Though physical findings can be consistent with colonic carcinoma, it is very unlikely that such a large tumor of colon will be without any colonic symptoms. Good. This is how a question should be answered when the examiner asks, why not this? Name the typical history and examination findings of that condition which are absent in the given case, and hence it cannot be that differential diagnosis. With this, we conclude the 7th case presentation in the series of cassette clinics in general surgery by Dr. Ghanashyam Vaidya.